Ace Atkins moved from crime reporting to crime fiction, creating Nick Travers, his NFL lineman turned private investigator. Atkins stopped by the Alabama Booksmith in Homewood, Alabama, where we sat and talked. Well, Mr. Atkins, thank you for coming in, taking the time to have this interview.
Very glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm told, and that's the first question anybody has to ask, is Ace on your birth certificate?
It's a classified secret. All I can say, it is a family name, and I actually was named after my father. So my dad was the original Ace, and I am Ace Jr. So,
Ace Jr.
Ace Jr. I was Ace Jr. Nobody calls me that. No one better call me that. But yeah, my dad was the original Ace. So
well, I think your dust jackets or publicity material or somebody says that's your real name.
Well, frequently, I'll not frequently, but a few times I've gotten letters from people, and they'll say, and they think that the letters are going to a publicist or something like that. And they'll go in and they'll say, really enjoy the books, but I wish you would have chosen a better sounding pseudonym than Ace Atkins, because this is an absolutely unbelievable name that I would have. Please, what is the author's real name? But no, I'm number 2. Yeah.
Well, you've moved across the border, but you're a real Alabama writer. Where were you born? Where'd you go to high school? Where'd you go to school?
I went to high school at Auburn High School in Auburn, and I went to college at Auburn. And so, yeah, that's a good point. I live in Mississippi, but I certainly still classify myself as an Alabama writer. I'm proud to be an Alabama writer.
And people keep telling me the thing that people know about you, and we will talk about the writing.
You don't have any photos at all? No. There's nothing.
Oh, there are photos.
Okay, all right.
Yes. But people talk about how you were a member of an undefeated, the 1993 undefeated Auburn football team.
I was proud member of that team in '93. We had a great time. Yeah.
And were you a defensive lineman?
I was a defensive lineman. You can see why I'm writing books and not playing the NFL. I'm about 205 pounds right now, or maybe 210 after I was in Memphis eating some ribs, so maybe 210. But I'm not certainly up to the 280, 290 to play a down lineman in the NFL. So yeah, played in college.
And was your father a member of an undefeated Auburn football team?
He was. You've done your homework. The only other two, the only two undefeated teams were in 1957 and in 1993, and so we were members of each of those teams. So,
have you ever heard of any other father and son combination that actually exists in this same statistical spot?
No, it is.
I have never heard it.
No, and it's a kind of a strange thing. I'm very proud of that. My father passed away about 10 years ago, and I was really proud to be a member of that team. And so I think the recruiters have some type of contractual agreement with my child just to make sure that Auburn's going to be in the running at some point. But yeah, the Atkins connection it was a wonderful thing, and very proud of my dad's history and past at Auburn.
Well, at Auburn, besides playing football and studying mass communications,
right.
You graduated and you went off and became a journalist in Tampa.
Completely by accident.
What, did you throw a dart at the map of Florida?
I think.
What kind of accident?
I think I had good friends that were living in Tampa at the time, and that moved me in that direction. But another thing is I was reading a lot of crime novels, and it seemed at that period a lot of crime novels were happening in Florida. So I had this very odd career path. I wanted to be a journalist, but more than anything, I wanted to be a crime reporter, and a crime novelist. I had been wanting to be a crime novelist since I was in high school, reading Hammett and Chandler and Robert Parker, and so that's where I wanted to go. But the current trend at the time was writing about Florida, and I was very intrigued with the novels of James W. Hall, Carl Hyacin, and so I just figured if you're going to get the good training to be a crime novelist, you have to go to Florida. And I had buddies down there, so I ended up taking a job down there, working part-time for the St. Pete Times, and then moved on into working for the Tribune for several years.
And you did work in crime.
I did. I really wanted that beat. Everyone hates that beat. Everyone wants that. That's the beat that people want to get off of. That's the beat where they often will push people to kind of take over the job temporarily, and then they'll move them into something else. But that's the job that I wanted. I wanted to cover the streets with the police department. I wanted to occasionally cover court trials, and I figured that was the best place to learn about human nature and about things that were going on in your city. And it was a wonderful training ground as a novelist. It's not like writing a story about old women doing basket weaving or something like that. This is life and death every day, and it was an interesting window for a novelist. So.
Yeah. Hemingway's first job after high school was crime reporter at Kansas City.
Yeah.
And he said, chasing the ambulance, going with the police to the scenes of suicides and murders, and going with the ambulance and going with the coroner was the best possible training for a would-be writer.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I used to keep a a book of Dateline Hemingway on my desk when I was at the Tribune, and it just introduces you to a lot of people that you would not ordinarily meet. And certainly becoming a crime novelist, you're not going to learn the reality of it by watching episodes of Law and Order. Being a part of it and seeing what happens was fantastic.
Hemingway also suggested, though, that you mustn't stay at it too long.
True.
If you intend to be a serious writer. How long were you there?
I was there, I believe, a little over 4 years, and it was just the right amount of time. The books were starting to take off, and it was certainly about the time to leave. And but I do miss it. I miss the energy and the pulse of it, and right now this book that's come out, I finished it over a year ago, and I'm just the gratification, that instant gratification of writing something and putting it in and filing it at 11 o'clock at night, getting up in the morning and finding it hitting the streets, at 5 a.m. There's a pulse and an energy to that, and I really miss that, and maybe we'll go back into that at some point.
Well, you have 4 books now. How many had you written while still keeping your day job?
2. I had written my first book, Crossroad Blues, and the second one, Leaving Trunk Blues, while I was working at the Tribune and drinking a copious amount of coffee at night, and getting in on the crime beat occasionally 7, 8 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock, making a pot of coffee and working till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And that was the only way. I had to get on a very rigid schedule to get these books done, and about drove myself insane trying to keep both things going.
But after 2 books, you felt you could make the leap.
It was time just for the production, and I just signed a deal with HarperCollins, and HarperCollins wanted me to hurry up and write some books, and keeping my day job is really being on that crime beat is so competitive, so time consuming. It's not a job you can really leave. To this day, I really cringe when I hear a cell phone or a pager, and for the last few years since I've quit the paper, I didn't carry them with me because they would go off in a movie, at dinner, in the middle of the night, and it's not a job that you can leave. So it was, if I was going to produce these books and meet my contractual demands, it was time to take off.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned that you like the work of Carl Hiaasen and Tim Dorsey as a friend,
Sure,
and so on.
Absolutely.
I smelled a whiff of Harry Crews in not only in your work but in theirs as well. Is he a figure in Florida writing?
Oh, of course. I mean, he's a mammoth figure down there. That's a wonderful comparison. Harry Crews is fantastic, and also the kind of wild Southern writers like Barry Hannah. Barry Hannah, of course, being in Oxford, where I live right now. Yeah. And I think just being in the South, and I really kind of take off Florida. I think Florida fiction, not necessarily Harry Crews fiction, but Florida fiction dealing with Carl Hiaasen and that kind of world, I think is almost a state unto its own. I don't consider it really Southern fiction, but Southern fiction in general, stuff that I really enjoy, crime novelists like James Lee Burke. There's just that energy and that bizarreness and that strange kind of quality that wraps around the South that I'm drawn to. That's the reality of the South, but it's not dealing with midnight magnolias and mint juleps and all that kind of stuff that people in New York want to see about the South.
Well, you didn't set your books in Florida. You set your books in 3 of them in New Orleans and the Mississippi Delta,
right,
and 1 largely in Chicago.
Absolutely.
So I'll bet you get more comparisons to Burke than you do to anyone else.
Probably, and that's extremely high praise. I hope when I'm at that age that I can write even close to that ability. He is just fantastic. I mean, his ability, and that's when he's always the guy, the sword that I pull out when I hear these snobs talking about crime novels not being literature, and I say, look at James Lee Burke, look at Dennis Lehane and Mystic River, look at these novels, and give me any so-called literary writers that are working right now that can even compare to these guys. Are absolutely wonderful. And just because it's about crime, it does not mean that it cannot be taken serious as literature. The whole genre system, I think, is just labeling.
Well, you make your choices, If you choose to be in a genre, if you choose to write PI or police procedural or detective novels, then you take the baggage that goes with it.
Unfortunately, but I think that there's, when you talk about something being literary fiction, there's an instant stamp of that saying that that's higher quality than something that is going to be a crime novel. I would much rather say there's more social commentary, better writing in an Elmore Leonard book than if you switch over. And I mean, do I have to see another literary book that's a coming of age story, or another book that's about a college professor sleeping with a student? I mean, the biggest cliches in the world are being done in that field. However, I'm not limiting that. I'm just saying that there's good and bad writing being done in crime fiction. There's good and bad writing being done in literary fiction. But if you talk to somebody like Elmore Leonard, he'll say, I'm a novelist. I'm not a genre writer. I don't write genre stuff. I write books. I write books about characters and that kind of thing. So I think there's some wonderful books being written, and I'm not putting myself in that group. I hope someday to be able to write to that ability, but there's some wonderful stuff being written in the crime novel field that I always use. Burke as an example.
And it's being written,
yeah.
and it's being bought,
yeah.
it's being read.
Sure.
Burke moved to crime fiction after 2 or 3 novels that were fine books but didn't sell much.
It's one of the perks. Yeah, there's a ready-made audience. That is one of the perks.
When you're going to set about doing crime fiction, whether it's suspense or detective, PI, police, doesn't matter. You need a hero. You need a sleuth.
Yeah.
And you have a sleuth
right.
who's quite a creature. Let's see if we can describe this man. He played college ball at Tulane, but then he went and played for the Saints.
Yep. So he's a better athlete than I was.
And then he got a master's degree and capped that off with a PhD from Ole Miss in Southern Studies.
And a little smarter than I am too. So yeah, that's a good thing about fiction. You have a character and you can make them a little bit better than you are. So
John Barth told me one time that when he had characters in his novels, he would have them own sailboats, just the way he did.
Right.
Except their sailboats were bigger. And they were better sailors than he is.
Why do you think often in fiction, there's always so many beautiful women? I mean, that's just the author sitting there in his room, writing and saying, boy, this is, that's the fantasy world is the draw.
So Nick Travers has brawn and brains, and he's a good-looking boy, and he's...
I don't know, Nick he's pretty rough. He's got some scars and broken up a little bit, so I
broke his eyebrow one time.
Boy, you've done your homework. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
But the second, after you get a detective, after you get a protagonist who's worthy and interesting, and people want to follow this guy, and they believe he's smart enough to think, and they believe he's big enough to fight, then you need a place. And you chose, as I understand, people move around a little bit, but mostly you have 2 spots. One is Northwest Mississippi, the Delta, and the other is the Big Easy. And this is not a mysterious question, but why choose those spots? They're wonderful in different ways.
I love New Orleans, and another thing, I didn't want to write a book about New Orleans. It was the New Orleans that we all know. I have a friend of mine that sells books down in New Orleans, and he always calls them crawfish and beignet books. They're the books that always focus on the cliches of New Orleans, and New Orleans is so much more than the superficial stuff. It's so much more than the Mardi Gras cruise and the just the crawfish and the image and the partying and the all that kind of junk. So I wanted to write books that showed the flip side of New Orleans, and that was the great thing about my training as being a crime novelist, is I could explore that stuff. I mean, the last book that I have, Dirty South, talks about the housing projects, the Calliope housing projects, and the Magnolia housing projects, and the rough side of New Orleans, in New Orleans East, and these are communities that you're not going to get with and I really don't care about the rich people and their problems. I really don't. I want to write about the real people in New Orleans. New Orleans is a draw for writers. It always has been. I mean, it's a mysterious place. It's got an energy. Right when you write the word New Orleans on a page, there is a million connotations that come from just New Orleans on the page. And the Delta, the same thing. I wanted to write about the Delta. People frequently will say, hey, how's it going in the Delta? And I very frequently correct them. I say, no, I don't live in the Delta. I live in Oxford. I live in the hill country. And the Delta, even though I live in Mississippi, is a very different place. And it's a very beautiful world. I mean, it's one of the poorest regions in the country, if not the poorest. But a gorgeous place during farming season with endless cotton fields and the broken down churches and the juke joints and the music and the food and the energy there. And it's just once again, it's escapism for me, being able to write. It's like Alabama on steroids. So.
All right, you got a man, you got a place. What a writer like you is likely to do is to give that detective a passion. You know the Trevanian books, the Iger Sanction?
Sure. That
detective in the Lou Sanction, the Iger Sanction, and others is an expert in art history. Your man is an expert in roots music.
Right.
Are you? What is your relationship to the world of blues and
well, the way
and Delta music?
The way this character came about was actually in a reverse process. I always wanted to write a book about Robert Johnson. I was intrigued by Robert Johnson. I was intrigued by the story of Robert Johnson. He's the guy who supposedly sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads, and he was supposedly murdered in 1938 at a juke joint, being poisoned by a jealous husband. And he's had some really deep, dark, the backwoods of the Mississippi Delta in the 1930s. And his books are Hellhounds on My Trail and Love in Vain, and this really almost like a ghost story. And I wanted to tell this story, but I wanted to do it in books that had influenced me in a way that it had influenced me in a much way that Chandler always had. So I had to come up with a character who would be privy to that world. And I didn't want to necessarily write a PI or, I knew a lot about cops. I probably could write a million books about police procedurals and that kind of stuff. But that kind of bored me at this time because I was being inundated with it. So I had read a book called The Land Where Blues Began by Alan Lomax. And I wasn't expecting this because I was looking for information on Robert Johnson to write this book about Johnson. And he was talking about going into the Mississippi Delta in the 1940s, wearing his blue jeans and his old work shirt and going down in the Delta to go hunt for stories. And he worked like a detective. He'd go somewhere and he was looking for Robert Johnson and he could never find him. And he went and he was looking for music and he found Muddy Waters at the Stovall Plantation. And so they'd go to one town and he'd hear about somebody and he'd go somewhere else and they'd get a lead and they'd work. So it was very much a person using their ability, like in a reporter or a police officer or whatever, using that ability to find people. And that's what was intriguing about that character of Lomax. And so there's an opening line, an opening paragraph in Land Where Blues Began that really became the backbone and formation of that character.
All right. The blues and a lot of New Orleans jazz, traditional Dixieland, the Louis Armstrong jazz, and other varieties are black. But you didn't make Nick black. You made Nick is a white detective dealing in black material in terms of his investigations, and black individuals in terms of the situations he gets into, both all the way back to Crossroads Blues and Leaving Trunk Blues and so on. Almost all the characters in Nick's world are black,
right? And
he's not, but he's very comfortable in that world. How did you get comfortable with that particular crossover?
I think the interesting thing about living in the South, living in Alabama, specifically with my experience playing college football, I was a minority at college. I mean, I lived in a dorm that was almost all African American. I was in high school where I played on a defense. It was all African American. I was always intrigued by that fish out of water quality of a white man into a black man's world. And also the core, I think, of really any good fiction is all conflict. And for me, Nick's assimilation to that culture, that assimilation to that world, really being taken in and adopted by two older African-American, essentially parents that he knows and that run this bar.
JoJo and Loretta.
JoJo and Loretta that run this bar down in New Orleans. I found that world very interesting, and it was also a world that was very familiar to me living in the South. I mean, frequently I talk to people in New York and other places, and I go, boy, how could you live in the South? Racism's so terrible, and there's just so many stereotypes. I said, really, that's the wonderful thing about the South is the cohesion here and the true mixture of races, and with blues, I mean, the great the gifts of the black community, the blues and the food and so much of the Southern culture. You can't separate black culture and white culture. It's all mixed in for the Southern experience.
For 3 books, it's mostly the blues, and then deeper water.
Yeah.
And you say calliope. Do people in New Orleans say calliope?
Calliope, yes.
Yeah.
Calliope. Yeah.
I said it aloud the other day, and I said calliope.
Yeah,
but what do I know?
It looks like calliope, but they call it calliope.
Well, when it's a muse, it's calliope.
Yeah.
But there you move to a place that a lot of readers are going to say, oh my God, is this true? Does this really happen? You have a 15-year-old New Orleans black kid who is a millionaire. He's so rich, in fact, that he's so rich that he can have $500,000 stolen from him.
And not think much of it.
He's a rapper.
Yeah. And it may not be the most comfortable world for readers to cross over. I mean, frequently when I told people when I was working on this novel, I was writing a book about rap music, and first of all, they looked at me and they said, what the hell does this guy know about rap music? You know, they see me and look like a, you know, like I came off a farm.
I don't know.
And they say, you know, what do you know about rap? But I was intrigued by this world in New Orleans, and it is very true. I mean, this is an accurate world that's portrayed. It is, you know, these young kids, 18, 19-year-old kids, even younger, having that one-hit song, that one-hit wonder coming out, reminded me a lot of when Elvis Presley and some of those younger guys in the 50s were coming up. Elvis lived in the housing projects, and when he had his first hit came out, it really changed his entire life. And so I was really going from the worst possible poverty, from the Calliope housing projects, which is extreme poverty in New Orleans, I mean the worst of the worst, going from that into lakefront mansions, driving Bentleys, having women, having money. You know, there's one story about the two guys that started this fledgling company called Cash Money Records. It's a huge deal now. Standing on top of their Bentleys at a party with $100 bills and throwing them up in the air, you know. And I love that world. It was fascinating to me. So you know, people may be scared off when they see this. They go, oh boy, I'm not going to read a book about rap. I hate rap. But it's not. It's about changing generations and that cross-cultural conflict, and it's about really what's happening today. It's you know, like the music or not, it's not a book about the music. It's just about different cultures, both within the black community and the white community. So
something that stopped me in your book, in a good way, that is to say.
That's good. Yeah, never want to hear that in a thriller.
Not that I stopped.
I put it down. No.
I didn't stop reading. I stopped in order to think about it for a second. I was, in my nice bourgeois way, put off by Teddy, who drove a Bentley, and his gang drove Escalades and Hummers, and the other guy's gang drove a Rolls Escalades and Mercedes. And Teddy's interior is rabbit fur.
Right.
And Cash has platinum teeth with diamonds in them.
Yep.
And I thought, holy cow,
it's extreme.
What a bunch. But then, and all that.
And that's not even really the most extreme. There's a guy, a rapper named Master P, who came out of the Calliope housing projects, and he had a Ferrari that he ordered completely covered in Gucci leather for the exterior, not the interior. The exterior was Gucci leather.
Okay.
So that money is spent in many different ways.
All right. So there I am with my bourgeois response,
Right.
which is, this is vulgar, wasteful,
Right.
wrong. And then you have Nick, I think, ask, it may be Teddy, it may be Cash, I don't remember. But the man explains why psychologically, psychosociologically, it's necessary or desirable or pleasing to engage in such wretched excess. And that made sense to me. And I don't want to put it in your words. I want to hear it from you.
Actually, it was a story that I had gotten from a friend of mine who played football with Deion Sanders. And Deion Sanders, they said, Deion, you know, you're a really intelligent guy, you're a family guy. Why do you wear all the jewelry? Why do you just excess and all that stuff? And he said, you know what, this is not about money, it's about respect. And he said, you know, really, when I go into a shopping mall and I don't dress up, I'm just some black man that walks into a mall, and I don't get waited on, I don't get helped, I don't get anything. But when I walk in and I've got my jewelry and I've got this and I've got that, they say, boy, that's somebody that has money, that's somebody that's got something. And so it really was an issue of respect, of drawing the attention. It says a lot about our culture and about society today. But yeah, I think that has a lot to do with the mindset of, you know, of the mega wealthy. It's about respect, not just excess or power, but really respect.
You're living on a farm outside of Oxford now, and Oxford is, at this moment in time, a kind of a literary center.
Absolutely.
We could name half a dozen writers who are there. These are old buddies of mine, by the way. Do you think of yourself over there with the Larry Barry show and Tommy and the rest? Do you think of yourself as a part of a writing community, or do you all just sort of mind your own business?
I don't think there's necessarily a lot of people sitting around shopping, you know, swapping trade stories, but it's not unusual, you know, to see those guys, and it's wonderful. I was actually a big fan of Larry Brown's for a long time, and you know, got to have dinner with him the other night and got to see him, you know, that's wonderful for me, just to be around somebody like that. And last week I was at the Virginia Conference of the Book. I got to spend some time with Barry Hannah, and it's just a real privilege to be in the company of those people. You know, both of those writers, Barry and Larry Brown both. And I think one of the things that maybe even brought me to Oxford was being a big fan of Larry Brown's work. I had finished reading Father and Son, and you talk about a crime novel. Boy, that is the grittiest, meanest, dirtiest crime book I have ever read in my life. And Joe. So it's wonderful just to be in the company of those guys. Two massive figures. So yeah.
Well, and there are lots more in town.
Yeah.
It's quite an interesting place.
Absolutely.
Altogether. Having created a Nick Travers and having a series of 4 Nick Travers novels,
Sure.
one's expectation would be there will be 5 and 10 and 15, and
Right.
if you have Sherlock or Hercule
Right,
Poirot, you're going to have more. But do I understand that might not be the case?
No, this is it. This is the last book, and I think I wanted to tell a story that really started off in Crossroad Blues. And I think that's the really the most interesting thing about the series, or working in series fiction, is being able to tell a sub-story that links all throughout the story. I think you'll find in Dirty South there's a really kind of a closure point for Nick in his personal life where it just felt right. Also, I wanted to tell a story that at the sub level, and I think that depending on what you're looking for, you're going to find different things from the books. If you want to go in, it's action, adventure, and his crime novel, that kind of thing. But if you read a little bit deeper and you look what the stories are really about, it really was kind of a planned event. Starting off with telling a story about African American music in the South. The first book was about early Delta blues players. Then I told the story in Leaving Trunk about the Great Migration of the blues up to Chicago, and I was able to tell that sub-story about the Great Migration of African Americans to the North. Then I wanted to write a book about soul music in Memphis and civil rights, and so that's the sub-story that's in Dark Into the Street. And then I wanted to write a book about what today's music is, and I wanted to write about something modern and wholly happening right now, both in the structure of the novel and with what was going on, not a story about sins of the past, but to tell a story that was wholly complete in the moment and everything that was happening today. And that's what Dirty South is. So I brought it up to speed. I think Nick has traveled on Highway 61 and he's seen everything. And I think it's time to write something else. And I want to challenge myself a little bit more as a writer. I enjoy series fiction. I think you can do some wonderful things in it. But I wanted to kind of change gears, and so I'm working on some books that probably deal a little bit more with my experience as a journalist than anything.
Well, once again, thank you. This has been a lot of fun, and I've learned a good deal.
Hopefully you'll go out and get that rap CD I know you've been wanting for a long time. I'll get that Outcast to you really quickly.
It's possible.
Yeah. We'll see.